We've been talking the last couple of Sundays in our messages about the opportunities that the coronavirus is presenting to us as a congregation to reach out in the midst of a very difficult circumstance. And I've taken a lot of inspiration from our forefathers here at First Baptist. I had the opportunity on Monday to sit down with CBC Television and was interviewed on our church's response to the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. And I was so challenged and so moved by that generation and the boldness with which they stepped out. The World War II generation is called the greatest generation, and I can't argue with that, but I've got to tell you, the World War I generation was quite a generation as well. When you think about that whole time period in relation to our congregation, first of all, in 1913, the church burnt to the ground. Virtually nothing was salvaged. It was a beautiful wooden structure, and it caught fire, burnt to the ground, and the church leadership, the congregation, made the decision within 2 days, that they were going to rebuild. What a challenge, what an inspiration. And in the midst of the rebuilding process, a little event called World War I started. And they lost a lot of their young people who left the church to go over to Europe to fight in the war. But the church made the decision, we have started this, we're going to finish it. And in the midst of a world war, they continued to build the church. And then in 1915, the church was dedicated. Beautiful ceremony, a wonderful experience that the whole Moncton community celebrated. And then just a few years after that, the Spanish influenza pandemic hit. And over the course of weeks and a few months, hear this, 50 million people around the world died. 50 million people. And Moncton was also hit hard, so hard that the city hospital was filled to overflowing and they could not take any more patients because they had no room for them. Well, we had a brand new church, and the church leadership made the decision to open up its doors in order to house a total of 25 patients. Some of them went into the vestry, some of them went into the Brotherhood Hall, which is the old gym below us, and some went into the Sunshine Room, which is the youth room now. And we had a missionary, a medical missionary named Hinson West, who was on a furlough from India, and he was the person who ran this hospital. Another doctor who lived nearby volunteered his services. There were about 13 nurses and nurse aides who volunteered their time, and for 6 weeks they ran this church hospital. And as I contemplated these events that took place in such close proximity, 3 lessons I gleaned from them. The first one is that the church responded quickly. When the church burnt down, they made a decision to rebuild within 2 days. My goodness, it takes me longer to decide on a new pair of pants that I want to purchase. But the church made the decision within 2 days that they were going to rebuild. And when the influenza pandemic hit and the city hospital was filled to overflowing, I don't know the exact timeline, but I'd be willing to bet very little time passed between their becoming aware of the emergency and their response to it. And they opened up the doors of the church. They responded quickly. Second, they took risks. How risky must it have been, especially in the middle of a war, to make the decision to continue to build a church? They had every reason to call a halt to the building process. But they didn't. They took a risk, they stepped out in faith, and they rebuilt. And then when the pandemic hit, keep in mind, a century ago, they did not have the modern understanding of germs and an understanding of how pandemics and viruses were spread from one person to another. They were trying to keep separate. They sensed that there was something about keeping separate that would be helpful, but they didn't really understand. And what a risk they took to open up the church, bring in very ill people, and allow them to stay for as long as they needed to do this. They took a risk. They stepped out in faith. What an inspiration for us. And third, they left the results to the Lord. They didn't know what would happen when they made the commitment to rebuild. They didn't know what would happen when they made the commitment to open up the doors of their church to very ill people. But they did what they felt the Lord was calling them to do, and they left the results to the Lord. So as we are in the midst of this pandemic, and when we do come out on the other side, and I know that we will, I hope that we keep these 3 lessons in mind. I hope that we'll be willing to respond quickly to whatever needs we see, that we'll be willing to take risks for the sake of the gospel, and that when we do, we will leave the results to the Lord.